My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and in this video we are continuing the series on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy with details that Peter Jackson got right in The Return of the King, Part 1. This video is a little loosey-goosey in the sense that I had to give Peter Jackson probably more credit than he was actually due for some of these, because a lot of these are kind of brain-dead decisions that he's basically just taking what was in the book and putting it into the movie without doing a whole lot to it. But they're such easy decisions to make that it's like, does he really deserve credit for them? Some of them, it's kind of easy to say, I mean, he was going to have to do that anyway. I justify this based on the fact that in The Return of the King, he does so many things that are so inexcusable that it's actually kind of impressive when he gets anything right, and also because I have to have something to fill up the material for this video. So let's get started and see what he got right in this, movie that he could have gotten wrong like a lot of the other things in the movie. So the movie opens actually with some stuff that is pretty good in terms of getting some details right, and that is Gollum's monologue about his own history with the ring. And it's not so much that the monologue itself is accurate, because we don't get all this from Gollum in the book. We get it from other sources, but some of the things that he says are lines that are pretty much directed straight out of Tolkien, like forgetting the taste of bread and the feel of the breeze and, all this other stuff. So a lot of the detail that Gollum puts in there, it's not exactly the same because he's saying it in the first person, although that's the first person plural because it's Gollum talking, instead of a third person, which I think a lot of this we get from Gandalf and whatnot in the Shadows of the Past chapter. So it's not exact in that sense, but the fact that he uses a lot of these lines and then kind of modifies it to fit this monologue and give us this backstory in this way actually works pretty well, I think, for the movie. And the lines he doesn't mess with much, and so it actually, I give him a little bit of credit here. This is one that I really do hesitate to give Jackson a whole lot of credit because he almost had to put this in. But there's this conversation right after Gollum's monologue, pretty much, where Sam and Frodo are talking about how little food they have left, and Sam says there should be enough. And Frodo says, enough for what? And Sam says, the journey home. And it's not even quite so much that the line is exact, because the way this comes up in the book and the way it comes up in the movie are different, and the line delivery is different. But the moment is certainly hitting on that thing that is kind of important in the book in a way that is more appropriate, I think, for cinema, because it really is all about keeping Frodo's spirits up in this position, and it's doing the same thing in the book and the movie, and it's done really well in the movie in a cinematic context, which I think echoes at least the spirit of the point of it in the book really well. This next one is a stretch, because it's so wrong in so many ways, and yet very accurate in some others. And this is Saruman's kind of final scene in the film, which you only get in the extended version. So, again, I'm working with the extended versions because that's where you get the most material, and by and large, it's better. There are some things where I think the original theatrical cut does better, but overall, I prefer the extended cut. So we get Saruman's conversation, and again, this is one where a lot of the benefit that we get is the fact that Peter Jackson doesn't actually mess with Tolkien's actual prose and dialogue. We get a lot of the actual lines from the book in this conversation. It's different because in this context, in the movie, Gandalf is trying to get information out of Saruman, whereas in the book, he's not trying to get information out of Saruman. That's really not the point. So that stuff is kind of not really right, but a lot of the other stuff is, and especially we get the whole, one of the great lines that Theoden delivers is, yes, we will have peace when, and he goes on this long thing, and ends, of course, with, when you hang from a gibbet for the sport of your own crows. It's like, again, this is one of those things where, should I really give Peter Jackson credit for including something that so obviously needed to be included in the first place? But again, he messed up so many other things in this movie where he takes a scene that's already basically perfect on its own and then messes it up and whatever. So I give him some credit here. But the other thing, and again, this is kind of where it gets a little stretchy, is Saruman and Wormtongue's death, because it's not accurate in the sense that in the book this happens in the Shire after the scouring of the Shire, and so the people involved and how exactly it goes down is different, but it's very parallel because in both cases somebody is trying to show mercy to both Saruman and Wormtongue, and Saruman basically just treats Wormtongue like dirt, and then Wormtongue kills Saruman because he finally just snaps, and as a result, Wormtongue himself gets shot. And that, that's all basically accurate, and so if you just transpose where it happens and who does the shooting, kind of accurate. So the fact that I get why the Scouring of the Shire was left out of the movie. It's a lot of additional material after the great victory that cinematically doesn't really do well. It's anticlimactic and all this. So if you're going to cut that out, this probably is the best way that you could get that ending for Saruman and Wormtongue into the movie and be as accurate as possible. So I do give him credit for being at least creative in that respect. Here's one where I actually do give him legitimate credit, because this is one that would be easy to just skip over and not worry about. And this is when Gandalf and Pippin make it to Minas Tirith, and they're going up through the different levels of the city. And one of the things that we can see, if we pay attention, is that Gandalf on Shadowfax is going in kind of a winding fashion up the layers. And this is actually accurate because in the book it describes the fact that each layer has its own gate, but they're set, at different ends so that there is no just straight shot up to the main citadel, which of course is a defensive measure against, invaders. So the fact that they, not only built a big, huge scale model of the city and then made this wide shot, but did it in such a way that accurately reflected that, is something that I think does deserve some credit, because nobody really needed to see that. It wasn't, the book fans are going to notice it, but the vast majority of the movie-going public is just going to watch that and go, oh, sweeping shot. Why did they have to have him go back and forth and, other than to just give us the scenery, right? Well, it's because actually that is the way it is built in the book. So, I will give Peter Jackson legitimate kudos for that one. Also in Minas Tirith, we get the White Tree, which the White Tree itself is not the thing. The guards of the White Tree, I think, are worth commenting on because their garb, their armor, everything about them is, for the most part, totally book accurate in regards to the description. They've got, the black cloaks with the silver tree on it and the high winged helms, and they are noted in the book as having kind of unique armor and whatnot. And it's not, it's obviously up to some level of interpretation, so you can't say necessarily that it's 100% accurate to the idea that Tolkien had in his head, because I don't think he has any illustrations exactly describing this armor. So it's not like you could just copy what Tolkien drew, I don't think. I may be wrong, so don't quote me on that. But again, given that it's somewhat a matter of interpretation in terms of how do we make this look in a real-life example beyond just the relatively, sparse description that we get, I think they did a really good job with it. They actually look really cool. They look really well done in terms of representing what the book does describe. So, again, legitimate kudos for doing a good job with, this book description to actual physical armor translation. Here's another one where you kind of have to maybe give Peter Jackson more credit than necessary, but when Gandalf and Pippin walk into the Great Chamber where Denethor is sitting on his sub-throne, so to speak, he's got Boromir's horn cloven in two on his lap, and this is a detail which is, in fact, straight from the book. And again, it's hard to imagine how you would do this any other way, because that is kind of one of the key things that happens in the story is they get there and Boromir's horn is sitting on his lap, so it's clear that he already knows what's happened to Boromir, and that becomes a key element of that very first conversation, and a lot of the reason why Pippin does what he does in swearing service and all this other stuff. So it's hard to imagine how you could have done this scene any other way and not had the... I mean, you could have, obviously, but why would you do it any other way? But again, Peter Jackson took a few things in this movie and did that, so I'm stretching and putting this in there as a detail that it was at least, it's so exact to the book that it's, at least kind of deserves a mention. Immediately after this conversation, Gandalf and Pippin kind of storm out of the chamber, and Gandalf mentions that Denethor uses his grief as a cloak. Now, the context of this and who he says it to are actually not accurate, because in the book he actually says this line to Denethor himself. He says, "You use your own grief as a cloak." And, the meaning there is somewhat different, but I find it interesting that Peter Jackson went to such lengths to include that line in the dialogue, even though it's directed to Pippin as... Well, it's not even clearly directed at Pippin. It could be Gandalf talking to himself. But in any case, it's the fact that he went so far as to include that specific line to get, whatever idea across that he wanted to, I just find interesting, because it is one of those areas where he pulls directly from Tolkien's language in a way that wouldn't be necessary for the scene, right? I mean, there's no reason you have to do that in this scene. So the fact that he does use that language directly is at least nice, even if it's not like a huge deal. Here's another one where we get Frodo and Sam with a minor hope-building moment. And again, this is one where it would be almost a jailable offense if Peter Jackson didn't put this in the movie, but he did, so that's good. But it's where they see the statue with the head broken off, and it's just lying on the ground with some flowers growing around it. And when the sun shines on it directly, Sam says the king has got a crown again. And this is, again, straight out of the book. This is literally just lifted from the pages of The Return of the King. So it was really nice to get that scene, because not really anything was done to mess it up, to change it, to do anything like that. Sam's line is exact, I think, or at least very nearly exact, and the moment is very much true to the book. So I really appreciated that scene did make it in. It would have been really sad if they didn't, and again, it would have been easy to do because they're already cutting out a ton of material to save time for The Return of the King, which is already the longest of the 3 movies. So the fact that they did take time to include this one little thing, which wasn't really necessary to the plot, anything like that, good job. This next one is one where it's accurate, and so I give credit. And the biggest reason I give credit is because watching the movie, you would actually wonder if this was out of the book or just a Jackson invention. Because we've seen Frodo do some bizarre things under the influence of the ring, such as when he basically just presents himself wide open to a Nazgul in Osgiliath and almost surrenders himself to it. So that it would be kind of like that in this scene where we see him at Minas Morgul actually start walking towards Minas Morgul and not with with Sam and Gollum up to the stairs. And because of that, like I said, you could almost just say that this is Jackson doing another Osgiliath scene. But no, this one actually is out of the book. Frodo is weirdly attracted to Minas Morgul and has to force himself to look away, like physically tear his face away almost. And he does actually stumble towards this dead city, as it's called, and as a result has to be pulled back by Sam and Gollum. So I include this because, again, you could mistake this for just a weird Jacksonism if you didn't know. And as a result, the fact that he includes it specifically here, again, it's one of those things that you could have skipped because of the time element, but he includes it, and I'm giving him at least a little credit for it. This next one is a really minor point, but I do appreciate it. We get a scene, of course, where Gandalf has Pippin light the beacon in Minas Tirith, which then sets off a chain reaction. This, of course, is not accurate to the book at all. In the book, whenever Gandalf and Pippin are riding into Gondor, the beacons are already lit, and he actually names the different mountains that they're on at the time. But here, it's different because they're trying to get Denethor to do his job, which he's not doing on his own, apparently, for some reason, because both Denethor and Theoden in this whole trilogy are just literally insane, I guess, at some points. But anyway, so he gets him to light it, and when he sees the next one light up in the distance, he says, Amundine. And, of course, this is one of those things where, unless you're a book fan, you don't even know what that means. But in the context of the book, what you know is there are these different mountains on which these beacons are placed in between Gondor and Rohan, and Amundine is the closest one to Minas Tirith, and then it goes on and gets to a whole bunch of different ones down the line. Gandalf doesn't have to throw in the line at all. Well, it's not a line, really. It's just the name. He doesn't have to say that name out loud for us to understand what's happening. So it is kind of cool that they throw in the name just as kind of like, not exactly an Easter egg, but it is a, hey, look, actual specific book information that we totally didn't have to give you, but here it is anyway. So I give it credit for that reason. This next one is, again, a bit of a stretch. It's the scene where Faramir and Pippin are having a conversation just before Pippin swears his oath of fealty to Denethor and Gondor. And nothing about this conversation is accurate in terms of it actually happening in the book, because Faramir and Pippin don't have a long conversation by themselves about anything. They just don't. But a lot of the information, and not even so much information, but Faramir's opinion of his own family, his father and brother, actually is pretty accurate to what we can gather from the stuff in the book. Because in the book, we do get the impression that Faramir really looks up to Boromir and even Denethor, even though Denethor treats him kind of like trash. He really loves both of them, and he has high opinions of both of them and their relative strength, at least what he sees as strength compared to his own. So when he's talking to Pippin in the movie, and he says that they're both strong and stubborn, that actually is pretty accurate to what we know his opinion is in the book. So it's a nice way of getting that information into our hands in the movie in a way that maybe wouldn't have made quite as much sense in the context of Faramir talking to Frodo and Sam, because they were trying to just get through the main stuff there and move it along. Whereas this gives us a nice interlude just before Pippin swears his oath, and it's kind of a nice moment between them. So cinematically, I think this actually works pretty well, and it's understandable why they made the change, because in the book, we get some more of this information through Faramir's conversation with Frodo, because they spend a lot of time talking at Hineth Annwn in the book. In the movie, they can't linger that long in just that one scene, so this is a nice way to kind of give us a little breather in between a couple of other scenes, give Faramir and Pippin a moment to each other, and kind of mirror what happens to Merry and Theoden, and then give us, some information that we didn't get because of how they kind of cut short the Hineth Annwn stuff. The next one, again, is one where it's hard to necessarily say that Peter Jackson deserves a lot of credit, but it is in fact Pippin's oath and Denethor's response, which is pretty much lifted directly from the book. The oath and Denethor's response about what each thing will be repaid with is accurate. It's completely accurate. I don't know that Denethor words his response identically to the way he does in the book, but it's so close you wouldn't know the difference if you weren't looking at it at any rate, and I think it might even be exact. And I do give a little bit of credit here, because you didn't have to do this. We didn't have to actually see the scene where Pippin gives the oath and Denethor gives the response, so it is kind of nice that they included it. And I like the fact that they very explicitly use the direct language from the book, because it's a if you actually think about it, it's kind of a harsh oath, and it does set up, although it doesn't really get paid off in the movie the way it does in the book, it does set up the enormous amount of tension that happens where Pippin has to save Faramir by basically violating his own oath. So, it was a great thing to put in, and they just unfortunately didn't capitalize on it the way that they really should have. Here's another one which, again, I kind of have a hard time giving too much credit, but when Aragorn and Eowyn meet for the last time, as Aragorn is about to go to the paths of the dead, and he ends up telling her, "It is but a shadow and a thought that you love," that phrase is also directly out of the book, and it is kind of different in its meaning in the context in the movie than it is in the book, but not too different. And again, I think it cinematically works here pretty well in the way that it was done. And the only real problem I have with it is the fact that the entire context of it, because of Aragorn and Eowyn's history together in the movie, is so different than that in the book, that it's really different. Because in the movie, you get the sense that Aragorn is really seriously considering going with Eowyn, because he's already told Arwen, go ahead and just go west. And so Eowyn's like, oh, well, that's an acceptable alternative. And so he's even had in his mind that this would be a good idea. Whereas in the book, he never has this thing going at all. He's always got his target, way out in the distance, set on marrying Arwen. And so when he tells Eowyn it's but a shadow and a thought that you love, it's because he's known that all along. You can catch little hints of it in the book at several points. He's been kind of wary of her feelings for him for a while, whereas in the movie, you get the idea that he's only just now come to this realization that this isn't going to work. It's not me, it's you, or it's not you, it's me, or maybe it's both. But whatever it is, the line is accurate, and it kind of means basically the same thing in both contexts, but the context is so different in the movie. It's just like, yeah. I have a hard time giving credit, but I will, just because it's literally straight out of the book. This next one is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of the last one, because the line is not in the book at all, but it really captures a lot of elements from the book, and that is where Gamling says we cannot, we have too few, we cannot defeat the forces of Mordor, and Theoden says, no, we cannot, but we will face them in battle nonetheless. That line I don't think appears anywhere in the book, unless I'm mistaken, but what's awesome about it is that it captures very much the northern courage element that Tolkien was very keen to represent in a lot of his writings, and which is really embodied in the Rohirrim particularly. And so when Theoden delivers this line, he's not exactly mirroring anything directly out of the book, but he is summing up in one line something that is very much present in a lot of the book. And therefore, I give credit not so much because Peter Jackson was like, faithfully adapting book here, but more because he kind of, whether by accident or intentionally, took something that was very much a key theme and basically brought it right to the forefront where we could all see it and really get what, Tolkien himself wanted to convey in a lot of ways. Here's another one where it would have been absolute travesty if Peter Jackson did not include this. And this is where Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli enter the paths of the dead. And we get the great line where Aragorn goes in, and then Legolas goes in, and Gimli says, "Oh, this is a thing unheard of. An elf will go underground, and a dwarf dare not." So this line is great because it's such a wonderful character moment for everybody involved, because for Gimli it really is his test of courage and his embarrassment at the fact that an elf is going underground into a mountainside and he is so afraid that he has to drag his feet over the threshold, as it says in the book. I do not like the fact that in the movie he then follows it up with, "Oh, I never hear the end of it." I think that kind of spoils the moment a little bit. I would have rather seen him physically basically drag his feet over the threshold, and that would have made it perfect. But the fact that they at least got the line in and did that, I think, was nice, because it does, it does give us that information about Gimli, that he really is embarrassed about it, and he's also deathly afraid of whatever's in there. The only real downside is the fact that they do make it too comedic, and especially in the Paths of the Dead themselves, they make it even more comedic, especially in the extended cut, if I remember correctly. I think they added some stuff here where they make it even more goofy than it needs to be. So I think they kind of undercut their own scene in a lot of ways, but at least they did include it. But again, stretching, because it's like, if you didn't include that, what were you even thinking? All right, last one for disc 1, and then the next video will cover the rest. When we actually see some of the siege of Minas Tirith taking place near the end of disc 1, we've got this scene where they're trying to break the gates of Minas Tirith, and they're using the smaller battering ram before they bring Grond in. And we see the archers up on the battlements basically shooting down, and we see these orcs just falling in huge numbers, and they just start to pile up in mounds, and it's practically to the point where they can't even get to the gate itself. And this is actually kind of right out of the description of the siege in the book, because it talks about how they just shot orcs and orcs and orcs, and they just piled up and basically blocked any access to the wall and the gate, because there were just so many of them that they had to walk over them or whatever. So that was actually a nice touch. It was not something that necessarily had to be done, but that visual of what it was actually like in that scenario, as Tolkien described it, if you know what to look for and you see that, you're like, oh yeah, I remember it mentioning that in the book. So it was a really nice moment in that sense, because you didn't have to show literal piles of dead orcs that make it hard to even get to the gate, but that's exactly what they did, and it's, kind of nice that they did that. So that's part 1 of details that Peter Jackson got right. As I said, some of these are kind of stretching, and some of them they don't necessarily deserve a ton of credit for doing what was obvious in the first place, but, I've got to find something for this material. So next time I will finish this part of the series, and then we will move on to subtle changes that only the book fans would really notice. And after that, we'll be done with the Return of the King and the whole Lord of the Rings series, and hopefully not too long after that, I will get to the requested video on details that Peter Jackson got right in the Hobbit trilogy. So stay tuned for that eventually, but we still got several videos left for this. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, share it around. Subscribe to catch my future content. If you're on YouTube, make sure you click the bell icon so you don't miss any notifications. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter for Tolkien-related trivia questions every week, and check out the other social and support links in the description below. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore Channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially elf friends Nathan Dufour, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.